Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing today? It's me again, Russell Mills. It is March 7th, 2022. I want to say hello. I don't know what's going on with this Ukraine-Russia situation because I'm very ignorant to it, but I'm going to actually play some clips. So let's get rolling here.
How do we get to a place where, Putin decides he's going to just invade Russia? Nothing like this has happened since World War II.
Oh, Holly, it is embarrassing, but it's also dangerous, and you wonder why we've got authoritarian presidents prepared to go into war with other nations.
Well, Biden once during the State of the Union could have been, a misspeak. Now in the second interview, it's starting to look like a pattern. Kamala Harris and her explanation of Russia's a big country next to a smaller country called Ukraine, and Russia's the bigger country that invaded. I honestly hope she was giving that instruction to a kindergarten class because it was embarrassing.
Yes.
No wonder Putin's been emboldened with these two in charge. It's just extraordinary, and it's heartbreaking to see the state of the US and being run by these two. It's dangerous and it's embarrassing, and it doesn't instill a lot of faith. And when you look at John Kerry, who's there, let's not forget climate change in the Ukraine war.
Stop.
Seriously, we've got, Me Too movements that are now being discredited. We've got ridiculous notions that we need to keep looking at climate change while the Ukraine conflict's going on. And I think Richo's right. If Putin's in trouble, I think we're all frightened he'll push that button. And I can assure you climate change will seem like a walk in the park to nuclear fallout. So perhaps we need to focus on the main game here and stop worrying about what pronouns are on the bottom of your email.
Very good. You're right about Holly Hughes. Great point. Are you on the same page with all of this?
Yeah. I don't think there's any reason for a political divide on this. This is a time when both sides of politics in Australia are going to focus on humanity. And that's what's lacking in Putin. He doesn't have any of that.
But the White House, Richo, is there substance in the White House? The world, I think, is legitimately asking that question.
There's not much substance. There's not much strength. It's pretty rudderless. So the question can't be answered positively. The only thing that you've got to hope is that at some stage Putin looks at the might of the US, not those who represent the might.
Yeah, I think he's looking at Biden and laughing.
So, yeah. I'm going to play another clip, guys.
Jen Psaki, who we often play here, she's Joe Biden's press secretary. She's always good for a laugh or good for pointing out the stupidity of the Biden administration and all its flaws. Here she might have let the Russian cat out of the bag. Have a listen to her explaining who's been in charge every time that Vladimir Putin invades Ukraine. It's happened before. See if you can spot the common elements.
I was at the State Department. The president was the vice president the last time Russia invaded Ukraine. This is a pattern of horror from President Putin and from the cronies around him.
Hey, Rowan, I think the thing is the first step is admitting you have a problem here, isn't it? Because who was president for 4 years when
nobody
was
no wars occurred, nobody invaded anybody else for 4 years. What was that bloke's name?
Yeah, but the bloke that they kept telling us was a Russian asset.
The guy who was going to start World War III.
That's the one.
Yeah.
What's his name again?
The
Donald Orange Man.
The one who put sanctions on Nord Stream 2, so Russia.
Yeah. But he was wasn't he the same guy who also urged the Europeans to step up and start
NATO
funding their defense and everything,
build up their energy supply so that they wouldn't be reliant on Russia.
And we found out just last week that he reportedly told Putin privately but if you invade Ukraine whilst I'm in the White House, I will bomb Moscow.
Yes.
And guess what? Seems like Putin took that seriously because he didn't do it whilst Trump was there.
What did Joe Biden and Jen Psaki tell Putin? You can invade a little bit.
Just a little
take
bit.
a little bit. Don't take too much,
The
Mom.
West-
Just take a little bit. I mean, what a farce.
Okay, let's see what we got over here. Just gonna see something real quick, gentlemen and ladies. I'm gonna just play another clip about Trump rips Biden on Ukraine.
Well, let's get straight to it. Let's bring in the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump. Mr. President, thank you so much for joining Fox and Friends Weekend.
Well, thank you. It's an honor. And we have a lot of problems in this country, but it's an honor to be with you.
Well, we're grateful to have you, sir. Well, let's start with the headline we've had all morning long. What's happening in Russia, what's happening in Ukraine. The White House right now is saying an attack could happen at any time. On your assessment, where are we and how did we get here?
Well, first of all, it's shocking because this should have never happened. It should have never happened. It would not have happened. And how we got here is when they watched Afghanistan and they watched the most incompetent withdrawal in the history of probably any army, let alone just us. They saw that, and President Xi and President Putin, watch what happens with China very soon, but with Taiwan. But they watched that and they said, what's going on? They don't know what they're doing. And all of a sudden, I think they got a lot more ambitious. I think Putin really wanted to negotiate for a period of time. I think when he watched Afghanistan, when he watched that unbelievably bad withdrawal, incompetent, where they took the military out first, where they left $85 billion worth of equipment behind for the Taliban to have and to sell and to use. And, of course, the death that happened. When they watched all of that, I think they got emboldened.
President Trump, Joe Biden is scheduled to be on a call today with Vladimir Putin. What do you think he can say? What should he say? If you were in office today, what would you say to Vladimir Putin?
Well, I wouldn't be in this position because we're in a very bad position right now. And it would have, as I said, it would never have happened. I know him very well, got along with him very well. I stopped his pipeline. I sanctioned them more than anybody ever sanctioned them. Nobody was ever tougher in Russia, but I got along with Putin very well. We respected each other. I think you have a whole different ballgame right now. This is just an exercise. He's not going to tell him anything, and I don't think Putin's at this point going to be listening. It's going to be very interesting to see what he does in terms of the depth. Will he take a small piece? When Biden originally said he's going in, everybody was like, "Did he just say that?" Nobody could believe it, but he said it. And it was almost like a card. Ukraine went crazy when he saw that, when they heard that, the president. But now the phone call, I think, is perfunctory. I don't think much is going to come out of it.
Yes, sir. Republicans have introduced a bill that would block aid to Ukraine until our southern border is secure. The thinking is, why would we be worried about a border in Europe when there is a disaster happening right here at home? Do you think that those two issues should be linked?
Well, I certainly understand how people feel. We had the strongest border we've ever had, our southern border. We were 3 weeks away from finishing the wall after going through 2.5 years of lawsuits with the Democrats and winning them all. We were 2.5, 3 weeks away from, think of it, finishing the wall, which is largely, frankly, finished anyway. It's a tremendous help. We had the best numbers in the history of our country on the southern border. Very little was coming in. Very few people were coming in, other than coming in legally. We had the lowest drug numbers, the best drug numbers in the last 32 years, and they were getting much better rapidly. And all of a sudden, this guy takes over, and the border is opened, and we have millions of people. I think it's 10 million. They say 3 million. But people coming in, countries all over the world are releasing their prisoners into our country. We're like a dumping ground. So I can certainly understand how people feel when they say, let's try and tie one to the other. We fight for other people's borders, but we don't fight for our own border. We're the strongest, the most secure border we've ever had at the south. And And Mexico was great to me. They helped us. They gave us 28,000 soldiers free of charge, because otherwise we would have, as you know, tariffed all of their cars and things coming in. And we got along great with Mexico. We had the Mexico stay in Mexico policy. Now it's called stay in the United States. Whoever you are, just come on in. No, it's a very terrible thing. And I must tell you, I do understand how they feel when we're fighting for other countries, but we're not fighting for our own.
Yeah, Mr. President, not only are we fighting for our own, we're facilitating that transportation with secret flights in the middle of the night, things you've heard about as well. But I want to go to our other border, if we can, Mr. President, and the idea of truckers and the trucker freedom convoy that's happening there, not just in Ottawa, but now on trade routes along the Canadian border. You've heard what, you call them Justin from Canada, what Justin Trudeau has said about them. He's characterized them as racist, as bigots. But their message has been clear from the beginning, Mr. President. The list of their demands has been terminate vaccine passports, terminate vaccine mandates, and stop the divisive rhetoric. They've been straightforward. They want freedom. What's your message to both the Freedom Convoy and Justin Trudeau?
People all over the world are watching, and they have respect for what they're doing. They're tired of being pushed around by incompetent people, being told what to do, being forced with the mandates. The mandates should have not happened. I mean, I'm very proud of Warp Speed. Everybody has given us credit. Nobody thought it was possible to do what we did. And that includes therapeutics, by the way, Regeneron and the various therapeutics that work so well. But what we did with Warp Speed was great. But the mandates are very, very bad, very, very bad. And I think there's a lot of respect for what they're doing. I see they have Trump signs all over the place, and I'm proud that they do. But that's what happens. You can push people so far. And our country is a tinderbox, too. Don't kid yourself. And there are plenty of our country up there right now, folks. When you look at what's happening, in Canada, our country, I think, is far more of a tinderbox than Canada.
President Trump, we're watching blue states begin the process of loosening restrictions across the country. In my one chance to interview in the past, President Trump, I asked you about Dr. Fauci. You were at the front end on so many things. As we panicked as a nation, you talked about balancing the shutdowns against our economy. And I asked you at that time about Dr. Fauci and the way the public viewed him. And you were beginning at that time to express some skepticism. I'm curious, and I'm not trying to give you the answer ahead of time, but I'm curious, if you look back on the past 2 years, some of which was under your watch, when it comes to COVID, what would you have done? What would you do differently if put in the same position? With perfect hindsight, what, if anything, would you do differently?
Well, we haven't been given credit, but we're starting to get credit. Warp Speed was phenomenal. I closed up the country to China. I closed up the country to Europe. That was incredible. And I filled the shelves. I filled up the cupboards of the states, which they were unable to do themselves. You had some very competent governors, and you had some very incompetent governors. But, I went around with the cupboards were bare, and they were. As far as Fauci, and that was a big thing, the ventilators and all of the equipment and all of the things that we were able to get, from goggles to clothing and the plastics, and we did an amazing job. Got no credit for it, but everything is stocked, and right now the whole country is stocked for something like this. The country, and this is long before I got there, was not prepared. Fauci, however, was not a big factor with me. He is a big factor now because Biden chose to make him such, but he was not a big factor with me. He said he didn't want to close to, as you know, very strongly, because we talked about this, he didn't want to close up to China, which was heavily infected. He didn't want to close up to Europe, which was heavily infected. 4 months later, he said that President Trump made a great decision and saved perhaps hundreds of thousands of lives, because I was really a single vote. I had 21 people in a room, and none of them wanted to close it down, but I did, because I saw what was happening in China and in Europe. Fauci did not play as big a role with me. He played actually a pretty light role. And if you also notice, oftentimes when he would say something, I'd do the opposite, which tended to be pretty good. He came out against masks, and then he became a radical masker. He was a radical, wear 4 if you could. But at the very beginning, if you look back early on, he was against masks. I mean, he had some very different views, but he was not a big factor with me. I didn't get to see him too much. I didn't deal with him too much. I made my own decisions, and they were great decisions, and I let the state run.
What's going on? He's kind of getting off the track, I guess, but I don't know about this whole situation with Ukraine and Russia. I don't know what's going on with it per se. Let's see. So let's just see. Let me say something for a second. But yeah, I don't know what's going on with this whole situation with hold on a second. Let's just see. I'm just trying to see if there's any. I don't want to hear no commercials on here. So let's see. Let's see, Mike Pence. Let's see.
Vice President Mike Pence, who is down at the RNC meeting in New Orleans with a cast of all-time greats. I'm just looking at this, Mike. You got Mr. Trump's down there, Senator Scott, Republican leader Scalise, my pal Kellyanne. It's a glittering group, and you're going to glitter with us. We appreciate you coming back. You know, Mike, I mean, this is a lot of this is almost like Alice in Wonderland with the Mad Hatter. So this morning, the Labor Secretary, and it's not personal, by the way, he's just doing what he's been told to do. He tells my great pal Stu Varney that even though oil prices are up to whatever they're up to, $115 a barrel, there's no plans to put oil and gas back on the table, quote unquote. So there's no drill. And at the same time, Mike, there seems to be plans to complete, maybe within hours, a new nuclear deal with Iran that would include removing all the sanctions. So let me get this right. We can't drill here. We're still buying Russian oil, and we can't wait to buy Iranian oil. Mike Pence, there is something wrong with that calculus, it seems to me.
No, Larry, there's everything wrong with that scenario, and I appreciate you having me on. What's happening in Ukraine is a travesty. The Russian invasion of Ukraine, the senseless bombing of civilians, 1 million refugees have already crossed the border, and this administration continues to hesitate to impose sanctions on essentially the lifeblood of the Russian economy. I mean, the reality is we need to continue to arm the Ukrainians so they can defend themselves. We need to sanction all the financial institutions in their sector, but the time has come for the United States of America to impose an embargo and sanctions on all oil and gas exports from Russia. I mean, to have this administration actually announce last week to make the point that their sanctions have no effect on the energy sector, and then even to have the administration's press secretary defending that only 10% of our oil imports come from Russia. I mean, people are dying, Larry, and the American people understand that every dollar that we send to Russia at $115 a barrel is being used to finance this war effort in Ukraine. We need to impose those sanctions. We should not be negotiating with Iran or working with Russia to restart the Iran nuclear deal. And for heaven's sakes, President Biden ought to demonstrate real American strength, restart the Keystone Pipeline, let loose the dozens of oil and natural gas leases that have been tied up from the advent of his administration, and set America back on a path toward energy independence. That's the only pathway forward to stopping Putin in his tracks, ultimately getting him to withdraw from Ukraine. But I have to tell you, I have never seen an administration getting more wrong at once in a time of crisis in the world than we're seeing today.
You know, Mr. Vice President, they're kind of sneaking around, right? So all attention is on Ukraine. as I suppose
Right.
it must. But, we spent some time on it last night on this show, and I'm glad to see now more prominent in the media. Doing an Iran deal under any circumstances, I think you would agree, sir, is a lousy idea. They lie, cheat, and steal. All they're doing is developing nuclear reactors. They're very close to it anyway with the enrichment. But to do it now, to reward Russia, who is their big ally and, godfather in the Middle East, who's at the we shouldn't even be at the same negotiating table with Russia right now, it seems to me. And then, what's going to happen. They're going to make a case. Biden will get up there and say, well, Saudi Arabia didn't give us enough oil, but Iran will give us enough oil. I mean, that's just enough to pull your hair out.
Larry, I think it'd be shocking to the average American here in Louisiana or anywhere across the country to think that at a time that Russia is invading Ukraine, that the American administration is actually working with Russia to restart the Iran nuclear deal. I mean, it number one, on its face, makes no sense, but you're absolutely right. I mean, when our administration came in office, President Trump ended the Iran nuclear deal because not only did it not prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, it essentially guaranteed that they would have a nuclear weapon in a 10-year period of time. And now what we're hearing about these negotiations is they're back on the 10-year time window. The only difference now, as we read in the newspapers today, is Iran has more enriched uranium today than they had at the time that we got out of the Iran nuclear deal. Look, we isolated Iran as never before. I'm going to be in Israel next week meeting with the new prime minister, the former prime minister, the current president of Israel, and I'm going to make it clear to them, whatever this administration is doing, the American people stand with Israel, and we need to expose any deal this administration agrees to for what it is and make it clear that the next American administration will get out of that deal every bit as quick.
So I'm not going to let this video keep going long and long. I don't know what's going on here in this world. I just feel like, American people and these politicians, they need to just help us. We need to help us too, just as well. We need to help our own selves as people, because the only way we get, things done is we help ourselves. And I just feel like the United States, it's just my opinion, and I could be wrong, they're always putting their nose where they don't belong. Always helping out. And I understand United, for this country to run, you have to have other countries to help us, which I get to a certain extent. You know what I mean? But again, it seems like everybody in these politicians, wants to, like they love chaos. And I just don't understand. It's like chaos is boring, I guess. So killing people, stealing from people, doing wrong, you know what I mean? Fighting back and forth, saying Democrat versus Republican and all this other nonsense. Which one is better, which party is better, and all this other nonsense, this one versus that, black versus white. It's like they keep pushing these agendas. It's like, it seems like every single time it's chaos, chaos, chaos in this country, or we're dealing with other countries that have chaos. It's like we need to learn to just mind our business. We need to learn to help our American people. We need to learn how to, as American people, to help ourselves more. You know what I'm saying? And stop asking, these governments that don't give a shit about you for any type of help, because no one gives a shit about us. We don't even give a shit about us as American people. It's like we're afraid to talk to ourselves sometimes. You know what I'm saying? And then again, you hear this stuff every day on the news. All this chaos, all this nonsense, all this and that, back and forth, this one. It's like, when are we going to stop? And I'll just say this and get off. People don't know there's a God out there. And people don't understand all this chaos, what we are going to pay for, in the afterlife. So a lot of us aren't going to make it. A lot of us right now that we think we're good people, we're burning in hell. We're not going to heaven. So all these people that like chaos, like ignorance, like stupidity, back and forth, this country versus that country, this law versus that law, and all this other nonsense. Okay. going to happen. Like I told you, repent now, everybody, because again, God is coming. And this is just more chaos from the devil right here, throwing off, throwing off America and every other country so we can be dysfunction, to have more dysfunction, which we already have. So feel free to check out my YouTube channel. So this video was a little bit longer than it should have been. I didn't want it to be. Feel free to check out my YouTube channel. Type in my name, Russell Mills, RussellMills, May 22nd, 2017. My first video, Why Black People Settle for Less. Everybody take care. God bless. Have a good night. Be safe. Bye.